Masonville, Indiana. A quiet town with more trees than people and more silence than news. At the edge of town, near the border of the woods, stood the house of Louis Trent, a veteran, once a mechanic in the army, later a soldier deployed twice to Afghanistan, and now a man who rarely opened his door. Since returning home, Louis had withdrawn. Crowds made his skin crawl. Conversations, even friendly ones, felt too loud, too sharp. He kept to himself. Volunteers brought his mail. Groceries arrived in brown paper bags dropped off on the porch. His life narrowed into something simple, quiet, and unfinished. The only one who shared that life was Rex, a German shepherd with scars beneath his thick coat and eyes that watched every shadow. He was no ordinary dog. Rex had been a military working dog, trained for detection, obedience, and survival. He had followed Louis through deserts and compounds, into helicopters, and out of tents laced with tension. He had seen explosions before hearing them, had recognized death by scent alone. He knew when Louis tensed up, knew when to stand still, when to duck, and when to run. But Masonville had no war. Only summer thunderstorms that rolled over the forest like distant drums. Only fireworks that cracked the air around Independence Day. When they came, Rex would crawl under the wooden table in the kitchen, his body trembling, his breathing short. Sometimes he would lie flat across Louis's boots, as if anchoring himself to a voice he could still trust. Louis never said anything. He just let him stay there. The two of them were bound, not by routine, but by memory. The kind of memory that echoed. Not in dreams, but in muscle, in footsteps, in smells. Rex still waited for orders. Louis no longer gave them. Their silence wasn't empty. It was full of things unspoken, fear, fatigue, fragments of sand and heat. In the evenings, Louis sometimes sat on the porch with a cup of coffee that always went cold. Rex would lie next to him, head raised, ears turning at every sound from the woods. The wind through the trees reminded them both of places they no longer talked about. The humming of cicadas layered over the ticking of a clock inside that neither of them noticed anymore. There was no routine, but there was still rhythm. Louis breathed slower when Rex was near. Rex's tail twitched once, maybe twice, when Louis sighed in a certain way. They were two halves of the same silence, broken in different places, stitched together by presence. No one visited, and no one was expected. But something lingered in both of them, a question without words, a sense that something unfinished might still need them, not as soldiers, but as witnesses, as those who came back. Rex didn't sleep at night. He listened. He watched. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind against the window pane stirred something in him. He didn't growl, didn't bark. He just stayed alert, as if the quiet held a threat only he could detect. Louis didn't stop him. He didn't tell him to rest. He just let him be. In the stillness of midnight, the two of them shared the same invisible watch, each haunted in their own way by the echoes of a world that refused to let go. One evening, Louis pulled out an old box from the back of a closet. Dust clung to the lid like it hadn't been opened since their return. Inside were photographs, sand-colored snapshots from another life, a base camp surrounded by mountains, a convoy of armored vehicles beneath a pale sun, men with tired smiles in front of green tents, helicopters against a sky so bright it looked white, and in one photo, Rex. Younger, smaller, his ears too large for his face, his gaze hollow. One leg wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage, but he stood anyway. Behind him, nothing but endless sand. 3 years had passed since they came back. On paper, their service had ended. On forms, they were retired. But Rex still carried fragments, literally and otherwise. Small pieces of shrapnel that never came out. A slight limp that worsened in the rain. Scars beneath the fur that itched in the heat. His bones knew things no one spoke of. And in his heart, there remained a readiness. for the signal, the word, the movement. But no command would come. The war was over, but he still lived like he was deployed. He wasn't a house pet. He didn't chase balls or beg for treats. He didn't bark at the mailman. Rex was a soldier who never stood down, a survivor, a guardian of something no one else could see. He stayed not because he had nowhere to go, but because he had been trained to watch, to wait, to endure. Even after the uniform was gone and the desert replaced by trees, he was still on duty. In his silence was grief, not the loud kind, the kind that lingers in muscle memory, in routines no longer needed. Rex was the one who came back, the one who stayed, when others didn't. That evening, something shifted in the air. Rex had been lying by the window, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. But then, without warning, his ears lifted, his body tensed. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not loud, but deep, like the sound of memory stirred from sleep. Lewis, sitting in his armchair, noticed it immediately. He reached for the flashlight by the door and stepped outside into the cold. The yard sloped down toward a dense line of trees. Between the trunks, something moved, not the quick dart of a deer or the slinking pace of a raccoon. Slower, heavier, human. Before Lewis could speak, Rex slipped past him, silent as a shadow, disappearing into the underbrush. There was no barking, no scuffle, only silence, and then a single sharp cry. Lewis followed the beam of his flashlight through the trees. His boots cracked branches and sank into damp leaves. Then he saw them. Rex had pinned someone to the ground, a teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, wide-eyed and shaking. A knife had fallen from his hand and lay beside him in the grass. Behind the shrubs was a pile of tools, flashlights, and boxes, things from Louis's shed. The padlock on the door had been broken clean through. The boy didn't resist. He couldn't. He looked at Rex the way one might look at a storm, powerless and breathless. Rex wasn't growling anymore. He stood over the boy, one paw heavy on his chest, his body still and alert. He wasn't angry. He was working, doing what he had been trained to do in another world, under another sky. Lewis called the sheriff. 20 minutes later, the flashing lights rolled up the driveway. Deputies took the boy without incident. One of them mentioned there had been a string of break-ins across the area lately. Lawn mowers, power tools, even gas tanks. They were relieved to finally catch someone, but no one asked the most important question. How had Rex known? How did he sense something wrong before anything was visible or audible? It wasn't the sound. It wasn't the movement. It was something deeper, a change in the rhythm of the land, a shadow out of place. Rex had spent years in places where danger didn't shout. It whispered. And that night in the quiet of Masonville, he heard the whisper again, and acted. Not because anyone told him to, but because that's what ghosts do. They protect the living, even when the war is over. After the incident, Rex became a quiet legend in Masonville. The local paper ran a story titled, "War Dog Protects Veterans Home." The photo accompanying it showed Rex standing stoically in front of the shed, ears alert, gaze fixed forward like he was still on duty. Online, the image traveled fast. Comments poured in from strangers. These dogs never forget what they were born to do. For a while, life returned to its quiet rhythm. But there were more knocks on the door than usual. Volunteers, neighbors, curious reporters. One day, a local teacher reached out with an idea. Bring a group of children from the elementary school to meet Rex. A small visit, just a few minutes. Lewis initially said no. Too much noise, too many eyes. Too much past stirred up again. But then he changed his mind. The children arrived on a gray Thursday morning. They stepped softly on the porch, whispering, unsure of what to expect. Rex stayed near the doorway, watching them with wary eyes. Lewis stood back, letting him decide. One by one, the children knelt, offered a hand, a smile, a gentle word. Rex didn't move. Then one boy rolled forward. He was smaller than the others, pale, with dark hair and quiet hands resting on the wheels of his chair. He didn't speak. He didn't try to reach. He just waited. Rex turned toward him. Slowly, deliberately. He walked over. The room held its breath. He sat beside the wheelchair, close but not crowding. Then he lowered his head gently onto the boy's legs and stayed there. The boy's face changed. His mouth twitched, lifted at the corners. Not a full smile, not yet, but something real, something alive. The teacher wiped at her eyes. Lewis didn't move. He couldn't. Something old and locked away inside him shifted, softened. Rex wasn't just reacting. He was choosing, like he saw something in the boy that echoed. After they left, Louis sat on the porch with Rex lying at his feet. The afternoon was quiet again, but not empty. He thought of the phrase people kept using: hero, protector, legend. But Rex didn't care about titles. He was just doing what he'd always done, finding the one who needed him most. And this time, it wasn't in a desert or behind a barricade. It was here under autumn leaves, in a town that had almost forgotten what courage looked like when it walked on 4 legs. If this story touched your heart and you love animals, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. For the first time in what felt like years, Rex slept deeply. His breathing was steady, unbroken by jolts or whimpers. He didn't patrol the hallway or startle at the creak of wood or the wind against the windows. He simply lay curled in the same spot until morning. Louis sat on the porch that night, the old wooden boards beneath him cool and familiar. He didn't smoke. He didn't speak. He just watched Rex through the open door, lit faintly by the hallway lamp. There was something in the way the dog rested that told him more than words ever could. It wasn't surrender. It was trust and peace, the kind earned, not given. He realized then that maybe their mission hadn't ended with the last tour. Maybe it had just changed. No longer to guard from threats in the dark, but to be the calm in someone else's storm. No commands, no orders, just presence. Just the quiet company of 2 souls who had both seen too much but stayed anyway. Over the following weeks, neighbors stopped by more often. A casserole from down the road, a couple of sandwiches wrapped in foil. One man just nodded from the gate, eyes damp. No one needed explanations. The article, the photo. They had done something. But it wasn't fame that changed things. It was Rex himself, the dog who listened when others couldn't. Louis began stepping out more. Not far. Just into the town for coffee, a paper, maybe a walk around the lake. Sometimes Rex came. Sometimes he stayed. Stretched out on the porch in the sun. It didn't matter. What mattered was the shift. Not in routine, but in reason. Louis didn't go out for himself. He did it for Rex, because Rex was still on duty. Only now, that duty meant staying grounded, showing others what quiet strength looked like. And Louis, for the first time in a long time, felt like he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was participating, in the simplest, most human way, through showing up, through letting go, through sitting beside a dog who, without trying, had reminded him how to breathe again. Summer had passed slowly, quietly, like pages in a worn book. The town prepared for its annual fall festival. Food stalls, flags, children's laughter drifting down the streets. Someone from the organizing committee reached out to Louis, inviting him and Rex to attend. He hesitated, declined at first. Crowds were still difficult. Noise still pressed like pressure on old scars. But the morning of the event, Rex stood by the door, not pacing, not whining, just standing, eyes steady, unmoving. Louis paused. There was no command, no leash, just a quiet insistence, written in the posture of a dog who had never needed words to speak. And Louis understood. They were supposed to go. The festival was already in full swing when they arrived. Faces turned. Applause broke out. Not loud, not forced, but genuine. People took pictures. Children pointed. Adults nodded with a reverence reserved for the quietly brave. But Rex didn't react to the flashes or the noise. He moved through the crowd with purpose, not show. He stopped beside a teenager sitting alone at the edge of a booth. He laid down near a man in uniform who didn't smile. He pressed briefly against a woman wiping her eyes behind sunglasses. Rex didn't perform. He noticed. And he chose, again and again, to stand by the ones who didn't ask. On the drive home, the sun lowered behind the hills, casting long, soft shadows over the road. Lewis kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the console. Rex sat beside him, alert but calm. The kind of calm earned through storms survived. "You're not just a soldier anymore," Lewis said quietly. "You're a bridge, nay." Rex didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone, the shift, the meaning behind the silence. He placed his head gently on Lewis's lap and didn't move. His eyes didn't close. He just stayed, present, grounded, whole. Because for the first time since the dust and thunder of a foreign war, Rex didn't feel like he was waiting. He wasn't scanning for danger. He wasn't anticipating the next mission. He was choosing to stay, to be still, to offer peace, where once he offered protection. And Louis, watching the road disappear behind them, understood too. They hadn't come back broken. They had come back with something to offer. Not in uniform, not with medals, but with quiet, with choice, with presence.